Hello, it's Rafael Gutierrez, and today I'm going to talk about tissues. Mainly, I'm going to concentrate on the tissues that are found in the skeletal system, and the reason is because that's the next system I'm going to talk about. I did get an email from someone who asked if they would mind if they would use this with their class. I actually was pretty shocked because I had only done one and it was a short video. If you are teaching anatomy and you feel that these are useful for your students, please, by all means, let them know about them, let them use them. I actually am doing this to share information. I think all information should be free, so if it helps your students, let them know. If you're a student and you're using this and you think your professor might want to know about it, also let them know. I am using mostly my lab manual, this one here. I call it Human Anatomy, a clinical approach. The reason is I decided to make an anatomy lab manual for my class originally, where I wanted to show them how to use anatomy. It works for my class. It's $20 or $10 on Amazon. Today I'm going to actually draw and show you a lot of pictures. Hope you enjoy this. Okay, so as I am going to talk about tissues, I'm going to pretty much draw a lot of it. You won't see me too much. Again, if you want to help support my channel, you can buy either of my books. They're available on Amazon. And what I'm going to start with is what's known as epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue, there's actually 4 types of tissues, and I'll start with that. Epithelial, the best way to think about it, you have a lot of cells for the amount of non-cell stuff. What I'm talking about is you really have a special look. For instance, you'll have a group of cells, and I'm just going to draw a bunch of squares to represent cells. And on the bottom here, you have a bunch of proteins, which we'll call matrix. In this case, those are called the basement membrane. And you have different types of epithelial tissue. You also have what's called connective tissue. And this one has a lot of matrix for cells. What I mean is you are going to end up seeing that there's a lot of matrix there, stuff that's not cellular, and are going to be cells, but most of the time, a lot of times in connective tissue, there's more other stuff, protein. In some exceptions, what happens is you actually have cells that are migratory, so there's going to be a lot. The other two that I'm going to mention here is contractile, which are 3 types of muscles, and nervous, which is what you would find in the brain and spinal cord. I'm going to start with epithelial tissue. And so with epithelial tissue, what you end up with is you end up looking at things depending on how many layers they have. If they only have 1 layer of cells, it's called simple. If you have multiple cell layers, it's called stratified. And that really just means layered. So many layers, it's stratified. 1 layer, it's simple. The other thing we end up looking at is the shape of the cells. Now, I'm not going to talk about specialized cells like transitional epithelium or any specialized structures like keratin or cilia. Those I'll actually talk about later. The cell types you do have are going to be either flat, like this, and they'll be, if you look at it from the top, it looks almost like an egg. And the flat ones are called squamous. If you see flat cells, they will actually be squamous. The other type we have is a nice cube-shaped cell. If it's cube-shaped, we call it cuboidal. So cuboidal cell means it's cubed. And the last type is a long column, so we call it columnar. Usually you will have a basement membrane, which is a collection of proteins. Then the cells will be on top of it. If you have 1 cell layer on top of a basement membrane, it's simple. If you have multiple layers, it's stratified. So these are flat. This is a basement membrane here, a BM for basement membrane. This would be stratified squamous epithelium. Ideally, sometimes the cells at the bottom layer look different. So always look at the top cells, and those will usually be more shaped either flat or cube. Sometimes what happens is instead of being in a flat arrangement like that, you have a basement membrane that makes a circle here, and you have cells that are latching on to the side. When you see this, always look at the basement membrane first. In this case, I told you it's down here, and you have an opening here. In this case, you have a basement membrane here, a cavity here. So this would be simple, 1 layer, cuboidal epithelium. That's all you really need to know about epithelium for now. What we find in bone, which is mostly connective tissue. When I'm talking about bone, I'm talking bone as an organ, so you're going to talk about different types of tissue. Now the first type of tissue that I want to tell you about is called areolar tissue. It's also known as loose, irregular connective tissue. Cells called fibroblasts, and they will have you'll see the nucleus. Then you'll see a big cell with a lot of fuzzy appearance, which is called a mast cell. And then you a lot of times will have a big fat cell called an adipocyte. So an adipocyte is a fat cell. A mast cell is an immune cell with granules, has heparin and histamine, which cause swelling. Besides these cells, the matrix that this has are going to be really thick collagen fibers going in multiple directions. These would be collagen fibers. And you have really thin, which are going to be your elastic fibers. I'm actually going to show you a picture of this so you can see what I'm talking about. So this is your loose irregular connective tissue, also known as areolar tissue. You do have adipose tissue, I'll just throw it over here. You have this big collection of circles and nuclei. If you remember before, are the areas that maintain the genetic material pushed to the side. Now this is adipose tissue, which is a connective tissue. And you will see these arrangements of cells. And these things are actually called vacuoles, which are filled with fat. And that's your adipocyte. In bone, sometimes you have certain type of adipose tissue within the medullary cavity. The other type of tissue you have pretty much has a lot of cells, usually blood type cells, with collagen making a big membrane matrix around it. And that's your reticular tissue. And those are your loose connective tissues. We also have dense connective tissues. First one I want to talk about is dense regular connective tissue. Now this one, you have fibroblasts and a lot of collagen fibers going around them. Mostly what you see is the collagen fiber and a couple little cell nuclei squeezed in this. But what you see is a regular arrangement of cells. You have one that looks almost identical to this, which is elastic tissue. It looks almost identical, except for instead of having collagen fibers, you have elastic fibers. Collagen fiber, the dense regular, is usually found in tendons and ligaments of the bones and muscles. Elastic fibers tends to be found in areas where you need a little more movement. So in the neck area, for instance, there's a couple ligaments there. The other one we have, which is dense irregular connective tissue. The difference between this connective tissue and the others is it has really dense fibers running everywhere. Sure, you'll see them in pink. I'll show you a picture of it. But they're running in every direction you can think of. They're just big, thick, dense fibers. Dense irregular connective tissue also has fibroblasts or fibrocytes, and these are big hunks of collagen. Now, the dense irregular connective tissue is very important for us because in bone, around something called the periosteum and perichondrium. Peri, in both cases, means around. Peri means around. Osteum is osteo for bone. Periosteum is around bone, which is a membrane made of dense irregular connective tissue. Perichondrium, peri again means around, and chondro means cartilage. So perichondrium is around cartilage. And those are the last of the connective tissues with the names connective tissue that I'm going to talk about, because what I'm going to show you next is tissues which are called cartilage. Cartilage is a specialized type of tissue that you find between bones and a lot of different areas. In childhood, you have it in what's called the epithelial plate, which is a growth plate, and that's how the bone's longer between joint. And if you wear these out, you can get osteoarthritis. It's also in the bridge of the nose. You also have some in the ears where they flap, and epiglottis, and you do have different types of cartilage. Now, the first cartilage I'm going to tell you about called hyaline cartilage. And hyaline cartilage, if you were to, when you look at a slide, what you'll see is these little holes inside of it with a little cell sitting inside. So this is a collagen matrix. The holes have a name, which is lacuna. Now lacuna is just a hole, and inside the lacuna we have a cell, and as it's cartilage, it's called a chondrocyte. If you remember last lecture, you remember cyte means cell, and just a couple minutes ago I told you that chondro means cartilage. So chondrocyte is a cartilage cell inside the lacunae, which is a space inside the hyaline matrix, which is pretty much a lot of cartilage and something called hyaluronic acid. The next one you actually have is elastic cartilage. Now, elastic cartilage is a little different than the hyaline cartilage in that it, besides just collagen, elastic fibers running everywhere. And you still have a lacunae, you still have but the fibers tend to run everywhere. And so when you look at it, it almost has a wool-like appearance. If you're looking at hyaline cartilage, it tends to look like glass. Elastic cartilage looks like wool. Still have the lacunae and the chondrocyte. Now, we are going to talk a lot about the cartilages when we get into bone. And the last cartilage that we want to talk about is called fibrocartilage. Fibrocartilage is a cartilage that's found in any weight-bearing joints. And what you see is really densely packed collagen fibers, and occasionally you see something that could be a lacunae. So we have the fibers, we have the lacunae, and again we have the chondrocyte. And those are the types of cartilage. If you notice, they all have a slightly different appearance. What I want to talk about is the two types of bone tissue. You do have the periosteum, which is around what you have is if you were to look at a bone and you see it as a hollow cylinder, you'll notice at the middle is a hollow cavity known as a medullary cavity. Around the medullary cavity, you have this bony arrangement which kind of seems to go all over the place, and it kind of looks a little bit like a sponge, so they call it spongy bone. It is still medullary bone. One of the things is the bone is called spongy bone, but it doesn't doesn't have the consistency of this bone. It just looks like it. It's actually hard and strong. You can also, you will see trabecula in there, so you have these arrangements of the bone going in different areas. Kind of like cross wires to help support the outer area of bone. Now, medulla is something you're going to come across over and over again, so it's a good idea to remember it, write it on a list, and always remember. Medulla is always going to be middle portion. It's either the middle or innermost portion. On the outside, you have compact bone, and the outside of the bone is called cortex. Now, compact bone is a little different than in the spongy bone. You have all the fibers going everywhere. In compact bone, you have a central area where you have a vein, artery, and nerve going into, and then you have these rings called concentric lamella. And within these rings, you have little cavities, just like in the cartilage, which are called lacunae again. And the lacuna have an osteocyte inside. So if you look at it, osteo means bone, cyte means cell. So an osteocyte is just a bone cell. Well, the bone cells need some way to get to the central area where you have the vein, artery, and nerve. And so they form these long projections across the bone, which are called canalicules. Now, this will run the entire length of a bone, and what you see is, you see a lot of these osteons, which is a functional unit called an osteon. This entire thing is called an osteon. And they will be all over the compact bone. And if you look at it, it looks a lot like trees. Now, outside here, you have specialized cells too. And when I talk about the bones in particular, you'll see how they actually function. So I hope you enjoyed this, or at least learned something, and hope to see you next week.